What's up, everybody? I'm Noah Khrachvik, here with my friend Osiris, and welcome to Marxism Meets MAGA. We had a conversation a while ago, and I think we both had so much fun with it, we decided to turn it into a regular series. We're just going to keep doing these, where what we're trying to do here... Oh, I'm getting an echo from your end, brother. There we go. Oh, I'm still getting the echo. Technical difficulties, right?
Try again. It might just be my headphones too loud. You got it? How's it sound?
Checking now.
Good?
Yeah, I think we're good now. Okay. Oh, nope, still there. Fun.
Oh, I'll put on my echo thing. Don't worry. Hold on.
I'm getting... Oh, you know what? It's on my end. I am so sorry.
Okay.
Jesus Christ. See,
It's
I
all
told
good.
you. Right before we went live, I was telling him that I screw up every intro. So there's our intro screwing up. Anyway, we're going to do this as a regular thing. We're going to set aside all the labels and all the mainstream media bullshit, for lack of a better word, that tries to get us to hate each other and fight each other rather than the real enemy, which is the establishment. So we're going to get into that right after we see the International.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
All right, we're back. Thank you so much for doing this again, brother. It's a pleasure to have you back on.
Oh, thanks for having me. I look forward to these conversations. Good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Last time, I think we got into some really interesting stuff. One of the things that was like just happening in the news was Javier Milei had been elected president in Argentina. And I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts just off the bat about what's happened with that since then. Unless, you got something else you want to start with. It's completely up to you.
No, I'm perfectly fine with starting it. I think it's right now we are at a wait and see. I'm still absorbing the information. The most recent big news that I'm aware of is that Milei has absorbed 18 different departments, and I don't know how their government structure, but it seems like it's under the purview of the president. He's consolidated, I believe it's 18 to 9, or he's gotten rid of 9 of them or something like that. But it sounds like a lot of them are being folded into existing bureaucracy. So I'm hesitant. There are red flags from my perspective. I am not pro-war. So if he's hugging up on Zelensky, which he has, he's worn the Ukraine flag in the manner of supporting war, I'm out. And then also supporting Israel as well in the same manner. Those are both American type, not like people American, like the oligarch American not working class, but the whole military industrial complex would support. And then he's trying to close the Argentinian central banking, and he's transferring that, but he's closing that, but transferring it over to the American Federal Reserve central banking system, which is worse, in my opinion, and it's an indictment on the ideas of liberty. I'm going to say this and then get your opinion. if you are a libertarian believes in decentralization. If he takes over and there's a problem with the Argentinian peso being devalued, if the answer to that is not decentralization, then it's an indictment on your beliefs. So I'm not happy about that. So it's a mixed bag. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. There's a few things that really caught my attention, and one was his folding of all these government ministries into just a bigger, not a bigger, I guess, a more centralized form of power where it is. Which one, that's creating smaller government, right? But at the same time, you're not getting rid of all of these things. You're just folding them into the same thing. Maybe it's creating where it's less red tape, but this is something communists have done in the past with way more effect. The Soviet Union folded, I think it was at the local level, 4 different organizations into the one Soviet so that they could get rid of the red tape and just boom, 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 get things done when they needed done. And it reminds me of that a little bit. Honestly, if you're so opposed to centralized power, you got to somehow handle that contradiction that removing the red tape also centralizes power, right? Because when you spread it out with all these layers of government, what else? What are you left with otherwise? Otherwise, things don't function. There's that. There's also what you're saying about the Fed. I mean, come on. If you're gonna be a one of the better things that I think libertarians talk about is their heavy focus on cryptocurrencies, right? I mean, if it were up to them, that's all we would have, right? And the idea that you're folding your bank into the Federal Reserve really is just taking all the power and putting it in the hands of our oligarchy, not even your own, which is wild to me. He also, all his rhetoric against the collectivists and the communists, everyone's a communist to him. He basically sent a letter to Lula in Brazil saying, don't worry, we're not severing any trade relations. In fact, we're going to improve trade with you. And it just seems like a lot of it was talk. A lot of it was talk, It's wild. Well, I mean, what are you going to do? A lot of it's just you run up against the real world. You can't just have anarchy, it turns out. You got to.
Yeah, that's my big concern. If you're an anarcho-capitalist, that's why I was like, let's hesitate celebrating him. Give it time because they will have to turn on him. Because if he's not, I don't think it's finalized yet, but I have the same concerns you have. I think the trade is okay. I'm fine with trade, even though if you're trading with somebody who's socialist or not. Yeah. But I would say if he is going in there and he doesn't fulfill his role as an anarcho-capitalist libertarian, that means he's deciding a different system is better. And if you are an American ANCAP and you've been supporting him, you have to turn on him. There's no choice. You can't even ignore it. You've got to go ham on him.
Right. Well, exactly. And I think really, I don't think he was not serious. I think he's finding out that he can't do these things that he said he could do.
That's bad.
And you know what? I feel like it's an anarchist version of a lot of the things Trump said. I don't think Trump was lying when he said he wanted to lock up Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. I just think he found out he couldn't, that deep state was a little more deep than he believed. Right.
I agree. I
don't know. He's still something of a wild card but his people are already turning on him.
Who?
The guy he picked to run the central bank and sort of transition away from it already quit.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, he had this big public resignation, and wow,
what's that about? The guy that Milei picked?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, yep. I gotta look at that. I have not seen that. Wow.
Yeah, it was. He
just became president. What, 2 days ago?
It happened even before he got sworn in, I think, because I remember this happening about 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
Yeah, there was this big letter of resignation, like I'm done, you're crazy, that kind of thing. It turns out that what I think it is he was a performer, right? And he performed the role very well, just like Zelensky did in Ukraine. He fooled a lot of people, right? And Argentina is already done with season 1 of this show. You know what I mean? Just like the world is done with season 1 of the proxy war in Ukraine. They're all over Zelensky. I mean, they tried to he tried to come for more money, and they threw what's his face at him, Mayor Pete. That's basically just giving him a middle finger. Like, no one cares about Mayor Pete. Just let him go talk to him, you know?
Yeah, now I didn't ask you, I forget who Milei was even going up against. Were you for them? I heard they were more socialist. Were they your type of socialist or not?
It was a complete sort of liberal, like the left liberals. Oh, yeah. Massa, who was basically, when Southcom came there, they were telling, the Argentinian sort of intelligentsia and politicos, this is what we want. This is what the IMF wants. And Massa was like, yes, sir, and made every policy that, and lost hard because of it, As far as their politicians are concerned, I wish I knew more. Those are really the only two I know well. And I wouldn't like either of them.
Yeah. So it's a situation that I've become libertarian leaning as well, with the, not just MAGA, more America first, even more than MAGA, and libertarian leaning, just from the standpoint of peace, prosperity, decentralization. That's all it means. And this is very intriguing. This is the first experiment of someone who claims to be a libertarian that we've seen become president of a country this big. So that's why almost every day we're looking at what's the new news from out there. So it's going to be very, very important to follow.
I bet. I mean, regardless of who you are, it's something that's important for world politics. I mean, the way our entire global system works now, everything international is tied to national. What happens with trade and the U.S. on a global level with Argentina affects us working class people here. I mean, it's not for no reason that they're waging multiple wars while our cities are falling apart. There's a reason they do that. And it's not that they don't know our cities are falling apart.
Now,
no, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to interject here because I wanted to make sure I brought this up and kind of set the tone for our conversation as people are hopefully coming in. So I consider myself a pro-capitalist. But one of the big topics that came up since there was an interaction, I think it was earlier this week or last week, I forget even when it was last week, I think, that people who are pro-capitalism need to be humble, as you talked about what is happening under the system of capitalism. And you can say it's not really capitalism or whatever. Well, then you can say that some of the bad things that happened under communism isn't really communism. So you got to be fair here. Under our system right now, the federal government is stealing our money in the U.S., taking our money, using it to fund wars overseas, not just the Middle East and not just Ukraine. It's all over the place, funding bases, wars, killing innocent people, and then skimming the money off the top, defense contractors, even if you look at Biden skimming it off the top, and then sending it back to the country, in some cases, to fund the politicians to keep the cycle going. That's what's happening under capitalism right now. So we should be very humble as we enter this conversation with somebody who considers themselves a Marxist. I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it's this sort of world that we get thrown into where, I mean, the whole reason we're talking is because we get people just telling us to hate each other and not listen to each other. Right? We get it depends on which fake independent media you listen to, right? That's really all owned by the same corporate media that the mainstream media is. But they tell us this cartoon version of the other side, right? And so you're like, oh, all the communists are just idiots that don't understand how the real world works. Don't they know communism failed every time? And we should treat them like, they don't exist. Just tell them what they think and tell them why it's wrong. And then they do the same thing to the liberals, the left, everything else. They're like, don't you know they're all hateful bigots who just want bigotry all day, and they're all evil deplorables and et cetera, et cetera. And the truth is, almost every time I talk to a MAGA person, a conservative, a libertarian, anyone that would tell me they're on the right, if I just drop every single label, I don't explain the names of things, I just go right into the substance, we are all on board on the same stuff. It turns out, there's very few actual racists left, like hateful people or people that consider people of other skin colors some other thing. You know what I mean? It's 2023, and I'm not to say that there's no racism. Obviously there is, but it's 2023 and this country is less racist than it's ever been before in its history. And that's a monumental achievement. And I think it's a good thing, but they're not racist. They're not, bigots, whatever. We are all just people doing the best we can, trying to figure out A, what's going on, and then B, what we can do to fix it. That's it. And if we put our heads together, we find out that we agree on a lot more than we disagree on.
Yep. And the big thing that from what you said there to me is let's listen to each other actively. So when you say these words, communism, Marxism, socialism, I know it for some people it will trigger stuff, but if you don't mind, are you able to bring up you in your own words? I don't know if you see it at the bottom there for StreamYard. I have your tweet. And it was a great example of, I don't see this enough. You are defining what it means to you and willing to have the conversation. I don't know if you want to share it at the bottom or I can just read
can
it.
you not share your screen?
Oh, sorry. I didn't know
you should be able to. Yeah.
No, I think.
No? Okay.
No. Yep. I think you have to pull it up since.
I got to pull it onto the stage. There we go.
So here's what Noah posted the other day. This is a great place to start if you're just joining, you don't know much about Noah's philosophy. He posted, here's what communism is not. And I'm going to do the not section and then get your thoughts on it. Communism is not forcing everyone to be equal. I think a lot of people, including myself, think that that's what people mean when they say it. It's not a classless, moneyless, stateless society. It's not a predetermined form we try to force reality to become. Can you expand on that? Those are the things that you said communism is not.
Yeah, that is one of the biggest misconceptions, that communists are just, how does Jordan Peterson put it? They force inequality of outcome, when what is really wanted is inequality of opportunity, that people should be able to make it or break it on their own merits. That's kind of how he views things, right? You will not find any communist country ever that has tried to do that. You will not find any communist theorist who has written such a thing, or tried to explain communism as trying to force everybody to be equal. In fact, Karl Marx makes fun of this idea. There's an essay he wrote called The Critique of the Gotha Program, right? And it was this group of German social democrats, he calls the Lassallians. They're all based on this guy Lassalle. And what they're saying is that they need to pay all workers the same, right? That way it's all fair. And Marx is like, well, look, one guy can do so much work, another guy can do twice as much. One guy has a family of 10, the other guy's 17 and entering the workforce and has no responsibilities, no anything. People are inherently unequal, just in who they are, how we all move and grow at different rates in different areas. To the idea that you could try to give them the same amount of money in this limited system we have is just silly. Right? And so that's what he said about that. We could talk about that for a second, unless you want to go to the next one.
No, yeah, we can go to what communism is. So I think.
Well, I'm in it with the communism is not. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I wanted to cover all 3 points for you.
Okay. Well, let me interject real quick. Equity. So I think what you're talking about with Jordan Peterson is the difference between equality and equity. And in the circles that I kind of listen to and talk with, equity, you kind of define it as trying to make sure everybody has the same outcome. So just to be clear, you're saying that is not a part of Marxism.
Correct. And never has been. Right.
So that's neo-Marxism then, which is really, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but whatever this thing is, this cultural thing we have now,
right,
it's kind of something separate from.
Yes. And there's a huge history. And we actually have talked about this for anyone interested. We went over the actual empirical history and real names of people responsible for pushing this into American society. And believe it or not, the biggest force in creating it was the CIA. The CIA funds the Frankfurt School, who are the culturalists, right? Or what Peterson would call the cultural Marxists, right? And they're rabid anti-communists. They consider Marx too conservative and Lenin wrong. The Soviets were all evil, et cetera, right? And yeah, if you look for our interview with Gabriel Rockhill on our YouTube, you'll find it.
Okay.
But I mean, the way China does it now is brilliant. They have a democratic system along with a meritocracy mixed into it, right? So the only way you can be eligible to run for a certain office is to do well at the layer below it, right? So Xi Jinping, he's president right now, but it's because he spent the last 30 years fulfilling the requirements at lower offices. He had to show that he was capable of helping the material life of the people he was helping govern and represent improve at different levels throughout. And so then he could stand for a higher election.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about the rest of the not. You talked about the not forcing everybody to be equal. What about classless, moneyless, stateless?
This is one of the big misconceptions from the left, right? So I did one from the right, and then I do one from the left. One of the ways, and this is just sort of the way we're taught to think. If you notice schools these days, they don't really teach kids how to think critically. Instead, we're all memorizing things, right? But for Marxism, that memorization and having a definition of something prevents us from understanding it scientifically, right? So Engels actually calls definitions the death of scientific thinking. He says that instead, to genuinely understand a thing, we must observe it and study it from its lowest form to its highest, right? So we can't just arbitrarily pull an idea out of our mind and say, this is what communism will become, right? And this ties into the rest of the post as well, and I'll explain it as we go. But this is one that when we start learning about Marxism, people tell us constantly, but you can search everything Marx, Engels, Lenin, all of them wrote, you will never find that phrase.
Now, what about, you won't find stateless?
Correct. Yeah. So this is the confusion with a theory that Marx had called the withering of the state.
Okay.
Right, which is based in dialectical thinking, that all things are in a period of development and ascendancy, then a period of decay and going out of existence, right? So they develop, then undevelop. And there's really no such thing in Marxism as the state as such, right? Just a real quick, I don't want to get overly jargony here, but it's in our understanding of what we call universals and particulars, right? So there's no such thing as some abstract universal such as the state. If we do that, it's stuck in the realm of thought. To be real, it's always a particular kind of state that arose because of particular reasons, particular conditions that gave rise to it, led people to have certain ideas and lead them for certain actions, etc., right? So what we have is a bourgeois state, right? Or a capitalist state. It arose for certain reasons. It has a certain characteristics because of real material reasons, and it changes in real material ways. It's not just an idea, it's an existing thing, right? And so the withering of the state is talking about when all of these states sometime in the far future go through all of their periods of development, there's going to come a point where the state itself is obsolete, right? We no longer need this politicized body to solve our disputes because our production is so good, our social relations are more developed, etc. And so it really, rather than being abolished, like we take a hammer to it, it withers away, and you just have instead the administration of things, right? A water department, a fire department, etc.
Yeah, well said. So I understand that position. Now, that's a big myth. That's a big myth of, let's just say, here's a big myth of what people come into the conversation thinking. Now you're explaining where you're at. So it's not even, I don't even really care about the history that much. I want to know where you're at, but it's relevant to talk about, how you came to your ideas. The last one is a predetermined form we try to force reality to become. I don't know if I fully understand that one.
Right. This is more sort of dialectics thinking, right? All of Marxism really is dialectical and materialist way of understanding the world, right? And so the materialist part of this means that everything is in the world is matter, except for thought itself, right? Everything else is matter, and that matter, its central component is history, is change. Everything is, developing, then undeveloping. Our bodies, they grow, then they decay, right? That kind of thing. And so one of the main myths on the left is that we have this, preordained society without class or money or a state, and we must force reality to become that, right? And then we get into why that's wrong in the next part.
I gotcha. So yeah, now I'm clear on that. Yep. Yeah, and that's what typically we believe, people in the circles that I talk about when they talk about this. So yes, let's go to what communism is. Let me just read these and then we'll go through them. The real movement of history. I don't understand that, so we'll get clarification. The return to the community. I love this one. I think we fully agree on this one if I fully understand it. The return to the community on a higher stage of development, and I might have talked about that one with in a past video of mine. The development of human society to a new stage. Let's go through those. The real movement of history, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's actually based on a Marx quote. In decades of studying Marx and Engels and Lenin and all of them, Henry Winston, Du Bois, etc., I've come across one single time Marx came out and said, communism is, right? And he says, communism is for us, not oh, you know what? Let me pull up the quote.
Sure.
Give me 1 second. Because I'm going to mess it up if I don't.
I know how that is, yeah. So
right?
Noah's going to pull up that quote. And if you're joining, thanks. We're doing this. We're going to do these periodically. We're going to keep doing a series of these MAGA versus Marxism. We come to these discussions with an open mind. I'm here to learn. I've got basic, very fundamental understandings. The great thing about this is Noah is a resource. So I think we should use him to figure out what people really mean. You found that quote?
Yes, sir. All right. He says that communism is for us not a state of affairs which is to be established or an ideal to which reality will have to adjust itself. We call communism the real motion which preserves the essence of society through the negation of the present state of things. The conditions of this motion result from the material premises now in existence. So what he means is that history is going through a real process. Communism is that happening, right? So we have general, and we'll get to this in the more of the post. We have general laws of development, and that's really what Marxism studies, is how society develops. What led to this? How can we move that along, right? And each time that a given society, be it American society, Chinese society, etc., when that moves forward, it's only ever based in the conditions that were there already. Now, when you explain that in sort of layman's terms, it's almost common sense, right? So you'd be surprised how many people just have no idea that we don't, pull a magic fantasy utopia out of our heads.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this. I don't want to get too sidetracked into Lenin, but just using Lenin as an example, I think the argument that some would make here is that they use the idea of communism as a tool to get people to support revolutionary acts to get a dictator in power, like Lenin or later Stalin or whoever you want to pick. What do you think about that? Is that true? Or
I would tell them, these friends, not to trust the mainstream media of any generation. Look into how something worked yourself, and all of us are smart enough to make up our own minds after we genuinely investigate, right? And here's what you'll find with this. If you look into how the Soviet Union actually functioned, and there are even CIA memos that admit this, it was a very democratic system. There was never a dictator with sole power, ever. It was always a collective leadership that what they said in public matched what they said in private. There was this thing when the Soviet Union fell, or even before that, when Glasnost and Perestroika are happening, all of our academics thought, this is it. We're going to find out they were always lying to us because we'll have access to the entire Soviet archives. But they didn't find that. And there's even anti-communist historiographers who say this. Stephen Kopkin has his first book completely debunks the myth of Lenin and Stalin as dictators. And I would say that there was a very an impossibility of democracy until after Lenin's death anyway. But that's every revolutionary situation. I mean, look at the American Revolution.
Yeah.
They could not let those royalists vote. They did not. They tarred and feathered them and left them in public square as a lesson to the rest, you know?
Yep. Good point. Let's look at this one. Number 2, the return of the community on a higher stage of development. I'm excited to hear what your thoughts are here.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just giving a lecture now.
Oh, no.
I'd love to hear your thoughts, like your opinion on that.
On this one here, well, from my interpretation, it means a more connected community, meaning brother helps brother, worker helps worker, instead of this, well, I wear the red team and I read the blue team and I don't like this trans thing and it's like, it's just so weird and divided over, it's not over finances or anything like that. There's a brother who I really have a lot of respect for, even though we do disagree on some things. I'm more patriotic, but he goes by Rome Bethea, and he rocks the old hammer and sickle Soviet Union flag, and it rubs people the wrong way. So I started looking into him, and I looked at this brother. He's creating a library in his neighborhood in Detroit, building his library on his own. He bought a location. He gets some donations. He's building the shelves. He shows everybody the progress. He gives people free haircuts in his community. He helps clean up homeless people, not to just give them a sandwich or drugs or anything. He gives them a suit. He gets them a suit and an opportunity to work. That's what I see in this one.
Right?
It sounds like you agree. Is that what you're hitting on this one?
Yeah, it is. Right. And it goes down to the very basic, fundamental alienation, the cleaving of our society. Back in the day, way back in human history, we were a sort of all in big communal groups. We all depended on each other, right? And it created these big clans and tight family structures, right? Tight community structures. And then as our technology develops, property starts developing, fights over who owns that property start developing, the families develop, and then private property itself develops out of this. And by this, I don't mean, just things we own, but property that is in service of more property. Also, real quick, I'm being told this is this Rome you're talking about is Rome from RBN.
That's what I'm talking about.
Revolutionary Blackout Network. Yeah, they're huge, good friends of the Institute. We love RBN.
Okay, good. I love them too, man. That's Nick and Sabby Sabs, and they're all great. Shout out to RBN. I don't know them, but I'm a big fan from afar.
They are. They're great people. Some of the best, hardest working people I've ever met.
Very
JB
smart
actually
too. Who
was in my last Basics of Marxism class, and we had the honor of going to the RBN Labor Summit last year.
Dope.
So it's very cool. So anyway, so this return to the community, that something happens with this, right? And our society is sort of split, and this begins class relations. And this isn't sort of a moral judgment on this class or that class. It's not. It's just saying that objectively, there has always been this struggle between classes. It's just always going on, and it takes different forms, right? The one of the big ways we explain how it's not class struggle singular, as in just an economic thing. It's class struggles plural, as in they take different forms, is that the Black freedom movement in America, the civil rights movement, the uprisings against slavery, these are all forms of class struggle, right? It was working people against a different class of people, the ruling class. And so this has continued happening on and on and on and on, right? Different forms in different places and times, etc. And it all follows property taking on different forms, right? And as this property develops and develops, it gets to a point where, and capitalism really kicks us into high gear, it starts becoming abundant, right? And as we continue on out of that and past that, we are able to overcome the alienation that this caused in the first place and return to that community. But we've gone through so much history, we're now on a higher stage of development, right? That it's not some we should do X, Y, and Z. It's this is happening and we should participate in it happening.
Yeah, if I could ask you, one of the hesitations people might have is you're bringing up private property rights. We talked about it a little bit last time, but people will look at it and say, well, that's whatever person trying to take my property, redistribute it, and I've got a concern about that. Who owns it? Can the government just run up on me? And what would you say to that as far as, because I don't even know if that's compatible with the Constitution as we try to fit this socialism within the America.
Well, the Constitution is one thing. It is very, very clear on property rights, and it is not followed now, first of all. But this is actually something I was telling you at the beginning, or before we actually went on. Sorry for everybody watching. that there were a few things we went over last time I really wanted to focus on, and this is one of them. And it's property rights and what is private property, right? And what is all this talk of abolishing private property? Because you hear that all the time, right? So I gotta go at it from a few different angles. First, in Marxism, there's no such thing as just abolition, right? Every moment of negation or abolition is also a moment of creating a new thing, right? And when Marx is talking about private property, he's not talking about, your microphone, your setup there, your house even, right? He's talking about property that is sort of owned by, what he was originally talking about was feudal lords, right? This land that they've claimed and is then passed on from person to person in a family in order to accumulate more money, right? Or more property. And in the capitalist epoch, capital turns into this, right? Rather than just straight up being this on its own. And here's one of the things he said about it is, we communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. But hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property, which is the property of the petty artisan, meaning the small workshop owner, and of the small peasant, a form of property that preceded capitalist property, right? There's no need to abolish that, as the development of industry has already to a great extent destroyed it and is destroying it more and more every day, right? What he's saying is that it's capitalism that's actually taking away people's right to property. And he goes on, and later on he says, so you're horrified and are intending to do away with this private property. But in the existing society, private property has already been done away with for 90% of the population. And it's even more now, by the way. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of that 90%. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property that the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In a word, you only reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so, that is just what we intend, right? So what he's saying is that you are the ones preventing people owning property. It's that specific type of property you own that does it. And when we do away with that, then everyone can actually own property.
Yeah, I think that clears that up. I think that's a little bit different than a lot of people have, including myself, in my head there. And let's talk real quick before we go on to the next one. You mentioned something. How many people really own property now? You know, one of the biggest pushes from the globalists, who a lot of people see. Here's where the confusion comes. So I'll talk about the globalist agenda. Like, let's just use the World Economic Forum. They famously once said, and I think it was even in an ad, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. So they're literally trying to do that. So then people look at that and then they call that communism, but that's not what you're advocating for.
Right.
It's
and
different.
It's like for us, those are the capitalists. Those are the people we're trying to fight. And it's like the rightists, they want to fight them too. So the only thing getting in the way is some words.
It's the words. Yep.
Right? Like, call it pink unicorns. I don't care.
Same
let's
here.
Get together and let's stop them.
But in fact, I think but you know what? I said I don't care what we call it, but I think we need to call it something else, because we're confusing these words, and it is very powerful because it's dividing us when we actually have a mutual agreement here. So that's a good one. Let's go to the development of human society to a new stage. I'm interested in that one.
Yeah. Okay. So I do want to say one thing on the language first, though.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think what language is accepted is dictated by the media. Excuse me. Oh, I'm drinking a bunch of seltzer, so I'm like, ooh. Anyway, I think that's all dictated by the media. The liberals were so scared of the word socialism about 20 years ago, and now they're all socialists. And it's funny, Lenin has a quote on how this happened in Russia in his time frame, and he says that all the social chauvinists are now Marxists. Don't laugh, because that's what they're doing. They're calling themselves socialists now. They love the word now. They just don't know what it means when we say it. So really, that's just about that. Anyway, development of human society to a new stage, right? In Hegel, I'm not sure how familiar you are with continental philosophy and German philosophy.
No, not very.
Okay, so Hegel's a big deal. One of the most brilliant human beings of all time. And Marxism actually comes out of Hegel. And in Hegel, he has these nodal points in his philosophy of history, right? And he says that these nodal points are the point of change from one period to the next, right? And what he calls the world spirit and what Marxists call social consciousness, right? And Marxism basically explains that humanity's always going through this change, but in order to understand it, we need to split it up into discrete stages, right? Really, it's just one big whole, but there are definitely forms we can find that are the same, and it's all based in the way our society goes about being society, or making all of the things that make it into a society, our food, our clothing, etc., right? And so what they explain it to is we first had that early communal society, right? The old community on the old stage. And then this develops into the great slave empires, right? Or the slave democracies, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, etc. This then develops into the different types of feudal societies, right? Medieval Europe and sort of feudal Japan and China and all that, right? Then this develops into capitalism, right? This then has something afterwards. And that is what we call socialism. Now, all of this change for Marxism takes place according to general laws of development that are knowable to us, that we can learn, right? There's a reason, the early peasant revolts and feudalism didn't accomplish the change to capitalism the way the American Revolution and French Revolution and English Civil War did, right? There was something unique and new about these that was able to establish an entirely new way of life, which creates a whole new way of thinking. I mean, if you wouldn't have had capitalism, you wouldn't have the internet, right? None of these things happen for no reason. We can explain them with these general laws of development, which is later in the post. The development of human society to a new stage is this next stage after capitalism. Whatever this ends up looking like, we can get an idea of it, a general idea through those general laws. That's what it is, basically.
Okay, so you're saying it's like the next evolution of society, basically?
Right. Yeah,
Now,
actually, Engels gave this like beautiful, moving speech at the grave of Marx at his funeral. And he says that just as Darwin discovered the laws of development in organic nature, Marx discovered the laws of development in human society.
okay, now did the phrase "by any means necessary" originate through Marxism or at all?
I don't think so. I think that was Malcolm X.
Okay, is it straight from? I thought Malcolm X was a Marxist Leninist.
No,
Okay.
no. I know he was friendly with a few communists, especially towards the end of his life, but I don't think he was ever a communist.
Okay. Now the Black Panther Party was, though. They considered themselves
Yes.
Marxist Leninists. Okay, and they would use the phrase "by any means necessary." Is that?
Yeah, I think
my
that
knowledge.
phrase was pretty popular in the New Left period, right?
Okay. So that's
And
where
I think what all it means is that an oppressor or an exploiter is never going to give you an option, right? It's not saying we want violence, although the Panthers did have a problem with using guns, carrying them around way too long, and they said as much themselves. And actually, if you're looking for a really good critique of the Panthers, Henry Winston, probably the greatest communist in American history, has a good critique of them in his Strategy for a Black Agenda. Very good book. But anyway, so what they're saying is that it's not that they want violence, but if it comes for them, they are ready for it.
okay. Because when I look at the Revolutionary War, I look at it as a self-defense mechanism from back in the day. They said that we are endowed rights from our creator, not from Great Britain, not from you, even though you're the biggest, baddest army that had ever existed probably at that point, and great navy and everything. We don't care how big, bad you are. We know we came from you initially, came over, across the pond, but now our culture is too divided. That's what the Declaration of Independence was. It wasn't a declaration of war. And we are now separate. We don't want beef with you. We're not trying to take your territories. Just leave us the hell alone. So then they said, obviously, Great Britain was like, hey, no, we're going to come through. And then that's where the conflict, it was in defense. So I'm trying to look at when you say that the next, this is like the next iteration of society. It came up a little bit when we're talking about it. When you look back at some of the other past, I'm not as expert in like the revolution led by Lenin or whatever. Were those aggressive, or would you say that they were defense as well? Because the concern is you want this new society to come, and is it by any means necessary aggressively?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, brother. I think here's the thing. From my study, I've only seen a little bit of this like really aggressiveness, but almost every revolution in history, bourgeois revolution, proletarian revolution, whatever it is generally defensive violence, right? This comes at a time when there is absolutely no other way of moving forward. It's impossible to continue the status quo. And so the October Revolution in Russia, for example, was the seizure of power from a sort of liberal government, right? Who were basically ruining everything, like destroying what was left of Russia during World War I. And it was so the state itself had lost legitimacy in the eyes of the people, right? And the Bolsheviks were the only people who were maintaining order. Now, as they seized power, and I forget the guy's name, but he was a czarist, and he attempts to take power back from them and marches on the Bolsheviks in the attempt to institute a military dictatorship. And so the strikes that are happening all over Russia become defense from this force. It wasn't sort of an organized thing. It was more that the only organization there was to defend against this was on the Bolsheviks. They had organized these Soviets or workers' councils, right? And so they were able to arm people up and defend, and that they took advantage of this and took power and overthrew the czars and liberal Kerensky government. So there's that. Now, in China, there's a very, very famous letter from Mao because it was largely a completely decentralized peasant movement that their revolution begins as, right? And Mao is talking to the other members of the early Communist Party, and there's only like 30 of them at the time, right? And he's saying, And they're like, Mao, look at these people. They're bloodthirsty maniacs. What are you doing? Right? And he's like, look, they're pissed off. They're disorganized. What do you expect? We have a couple choices because revolution is not a dinner party. They're forcing this on us. Things are moving. We can either lead and we can organize this and make it as sort of efficient as possible. We can follow them and turn into bloodthirsty maniacs, or we can stay in their way. And the Communist Party chose to win their support and lead them.
Yep. Okay. Well, let's transition into, I think that's a good transition to the conversation. This is how I got in. I saw this from She Van Fleet. And let's just go through this real quick, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. I'll give my thoughts and then hear yours. You are right about what communism is not and wrong about what communism is. As someone who lived through communism, I can tell you communism is a demonic religion and is all about mind control. Communism is slavery. And it is all about controlling every aspect of people's lives. Communism demands total submission and has no hesitation in brutal suppression of those who dare to challenge the regime, including those like you who dare to interpret communism in your own way. My thought here was I thought gracefully explained what communism was and was not for you. And I thought She Van Fleet, actually looking at it now at the end, actually heard what you said and didn't care. Interpret communism your own way. I don't know why can't you interpret communism your own way? Why wouldn't you be able to? But she has her own experience that's obviously very jarring, very scarring life experience with communism. What would you say to somebody like that? For me, I care more about what you mean by that. Even though there were death, destruction under communism, there's death, destruction now. But if you were to respond to She Van Fleet, what would you say?
You know what? It's funny because I tried to respond to her.
Yeah.
In fact, in the past, she quote tweeted me out of nowhere before, and so I was like, "Look, I'm happy to have a conversation with you anytime you want. We'll talk about whatever you want, but I think you're lying here, and that's disrespecting the American people who are my people, your people now too, right? Since you moved here, and that's disrespecting them, and we should hash this out. If you genuinely care, let's talk about it." And she said, "Well, read my book, and then we'll set it up." So I said, "Okay, send me a copy. I'll send you my address." And she was like, no, buy it yourself. I'm like, all right, cheapskate, fine. I'll buy a copy, right? I read her book, and it is very dishonest. And I won't get into all that because I'm not going to be childish about it. But I tell her, I'm like, look, I finished reading. Here's one of the things I think you're lying about. I go through it point by point. Let's set this up. You know I'm serious. And she ignores me and ignores me and ignores me. And then I find out she's attached to the Victims of Communism Foundation, which is an NGO, and funded by the same think tanks as the rest of them, or think tanks funded by the same financiers as the rest of them. And she does this, and I'm like, look, I don't know. Here's the thing: you can't go on one person's lived experience. If we take what she says right here, I can give you 100 people living in capitalism right now who will tell you the exact same thing, right? And I could also give you over 1 billion Chinese people who will tell you the exact opposite thing. We can't really just go on people's perceptions alone. We need to be able to take a general view of things and then use our own critical thinking once we have all of the facts to assess the situation. And the problem is this lived experience thing or hyper individualism. By the way, it's very liberal if you ask me. Like don't tell me my lived experience, but it doesn't work if we're genuinely trying to understand a situation. People's opinions are always colored. They can always be wrong. You know what I mean? Like, it's just wild. I don't know.
Yeah, you mentioned that the lived experience is actually a tenet of critical race theory that is not the Marxism that is the cultural Marxism of today.
Right.
So you're right, it is somewhat of a leftist or mind state of saying, here's my experience, you have to take it as fact in general, basically saying somebody was racist to me, so the whole country's racist or whatever you want to say,
Right.
same thing. Now, let me ask you, what was she lying about? So are you challenging her own, that is kind of a very sensitive ground. I assume, is she talking about Mao? Who is she?
She was actually, it was a theoretical point on Marxism.
But
And
who
it's actually,
does she live under though? Does she live under?
I assume it would be Deng Xiaoping and Hu Jintao, maybe one more. I don't know when she moved here, but she can't be that old. That she must have been a little girl when Mao died, I assume. But Deng Xiaoping was the reform and opening up period, right? That was when they allowed foreign investment in the country, right? Which is funny because people say, like no private investment. Like, well, they did it. The Russians did it at the beginning of the Soviet Union. I mean, anyway, it's funny because it's literally exactly what you just brought up. She was trying to say critical race theory is Marxism, and wokeism is also critical race theory and also Marxism. And I'm like, well, I actually have studied Marxism and I've looked into critical race theory, and I don't have a very deep engagement with it, but I know what it is. I know the couple forms of it. There's an idealist school and a materialist school, and they have absolutely opposed foundational premises of what reality is. And so I explain that. I go down, I'm like, look, critical race theory posits a different way of understanding and living between different types of people. And what Marxism says instead is that those differences in types of people are only particular forms of the same universal humanity. They are not mutually opposed at all, but instead, the mutual opposition takes place in class rather than in, the million things that the liberals will tell you they take place in. There's even a woke version of being anti-immigrant now that they call everybody settlers, right? It's all about difference, but Marxism instead sees universality in difference.
Yeah, so wait, I was unclear there. What part was she lying about? This happened where I didn't even see the conversation. So what specifically do you think she was lying about?
She was saying that critical race theory was Marxism.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I'm clear on that now. I'm not conflating. Now, if I say Marxism, I'm always going to say neo. I don't even know if that's good enough. Maybe I should just stay away from that altogether. What would you what would be the best way to call it so we don't conflate it with your beliefs?
It's so funny because according to the Marxist view, it's like this idea that there's different interpretations that are all equally valid is a very postmodern view. And Marxism would say, well, you're really either interpreting it correctly or not. A pizza is a pizza. Because you see a pear doesn't make it a pear for you, right? You're just seeing it wrong, my man. But we have been trying to think of a good term for this forever. We call them the fake left sometimes. The academic I mentioned that we interviewed who traced the history of this, he calls them radical recuperators.
What does that mean? Radical recuperators.
It means they recuperate radicalism into the establishment, basically. We call them the fake left. We call them controlled counter hegemony, meaning they appear like they're against the hegemonic forces, but really they're controlled by them, right? But I wish there was a catchy term for them.
Yeah,
right?
We'll think about that. Let's think about. I'll think about that and see if we can find a branding that makes sense for us. So that's where that left off. I'm going to wrap up this part with the She Van Fleet of you look at two people, and one of them I didn't even know until you said she was a part of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. Okay, that's a government thing. It was created by the U.S. government, obviously, to be biased against communism. So where do we look at something created from the U.S. government like it's gospel? So I'm not going to look at that like it's gospel. And I look at you versus her, and you said, "Hey, I'll have a conversation. Let's talk." It's not. You're very respectful. There's no any funny business or anything like that. Then she comes with this BS about read my book. And then you go buy my book. And it's just like, wait a second, you're not real. I don't think, don't waste your time with people who aren't real. But you look at the two things, I will have conversations and you can build with real people. And I don't know She Van Fleet, but just from that interaction, not my cup of tea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
and what's funny is when she does this quote tweet of me, which was really, I mean, underneath that, it's the Victims of Communism Foundation targeting me, because that screws me up when I have important things coming out on social media, right? Because my mentions are gone for a week. And I had very important things. And anyway, that's what I think that really was. But so when she does this, I'm like, hey, remember that conversation you agreed to? Let's do it. I'll have it whenever you want, right? It was, why don't you go to North Korea first? Then we'll have the conversation. I'm like, I can't win with you.
I know. There's always a different qualification. But since you brought up North Korea, somebody got in my mentions and said, your boy Noah, you didn't see this, your boy Noah, I think somebody, I don't know if it was you, somebody said that they had a friend that went to North Korea and liked it, which is a very triggering thing from what we perceive. Did you say that? What's the details there?
I did, and I do. His name is Zhang Yu. He's actually a friend of the Institute. He's a Chinese from Taiwan rapper, and he has really good music, actually. Very nice guy. And he went on a trip to North Korea. Tourism there is pretty popular. I can send you some videos of some of the tours that just random people take videos. It's a normal place, but it's a poor country, I don't think there's, especially after the 90s, there's any denying that they're poor, and the people can have it rough sometimes, but it's a normal place with normal people and normal problems, I think Eddie, that works for our institute, specializes is a big word, but has done a lot of debunks of North Korea propaganda, believe it or not. There's this one actress named Yeonmi Park. And
she's big, and I know who you're talking about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Eddie's got a bunch of videos going over her different lies, showing video evidence of her lying, and how it works and all that, if you're ever interested.
Let's do that for another time. But we can do a whole thing on that, because she's very big in the circles. I don't talk about her much because I don't know much about her, but she's been on Tim Pool. I'm a big Tim Pool fan. She's all over. She'll be I think she's going to be at AmFest, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure. But the conservative side, she's a star. I mean, she's blown up there. So you could debunk her, huh?
Oh, we do all the time. And this is what's wild to me. One of the most admirable things about conservatives is their media skepticism, right? That you're seeing something come at you and you're just like, bullshit, like, prove it to me. But then there's certain subjects where all that skepticism just
goes out
gets
the window
forgotten for a minute. And I don't think people even know they're doing it, right? They're just like, and then I say it, and because this is how I talk to the guys I work with all the time. I'm like, wait a minute, where'd your media skepticism go, buddy? Like, it was just here. We were just agreeing, but now this subject comes up and you forgot it. Let's apply it again and we'll come to the facts together,
Great point. So we got about 15 minutes left here. I didn't talk to you about this beforehand, but I am interested in, before I even read anything from Mr. James Lindsay, do you follow James Lindsay at all? What do you know about? Do you agree, disagree? What do you think about James Lindsay?
So we actually did an entire stream explaining one of his theories and how it was wrong. I think he has some very precise criticisms of what we would call the fake left. His problem, however, is that he confuses it with Marxism, and he makes this leap where he says that communism, Marxism, etc., has transitioned into wokeism, right? And he says, really, it took this cultural turn. But when you get this history that I was talking about and how the fake left is created by CIA programs like the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the Frankfurt School, and you can look up the books the Frankfurt School people were writing, right? Herbert Marcuse is one of the big ones. If you read his acknowledgments section in his book, One Dimensional Man, it's a who's who list of Rockefeller Foundation people, Ford Foundation people, CIA brass.
Wow.
The guy created the anti-communist branch of Columbia University.
Wow.
These were never attached to Marxism in any way. They were always from the foundation propped up and funded in order to fight against communism by our establishment after they start realizing repressing the communists, arresting them for communists, that tends to piss Americans off, right? It tends to get them on the communist side. We can't have that. What we need to do is make them look like assholes. Nobody will want to hang out with them then, which is true. That's what the fake left does. They run around basically giving us a bad name, making us look like lunatics, right? And so what James Lindsay does, his whole thing is, one, he says this transition happened. Two, he wraps this all together and then calls it a religion by continually comparing it to like Gnosticism. But he misses key points. And I'd love to go through and like explain what the actual truth is and what he's getting right and what he's getting wrong.
Okay, yeah, we can just talk about it in general here. Basically, he's using Mao. We haven't talked about Mao very much here. So I just want to do a little bit on this, and then I want to leave on this is going to sound funny to people who listen to my channel, but I am curious about some of the positive things. I believe it was Stalin. You said there were some positive things about Stalin. I want to end on that. But real on this one here, about 5 minutes, he's basically going through Mao. We haven't talked about Mao, and going back, he's comparing some similarities between how Mao came into power and the cultural Marxism of today. And I don't know what your opinion is on Mao, but you do see some things like, for example, we talk about struggle sessions. I don't know if you talk about those often, but in the circles where I'm at, where we're like, we don't like this, public shaming basically just for your opinion. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that is something the American people will never accept. What happened during a period of the Chinese Revolution they called the Cultural Revolution, the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, right? And it's funny because, are you familiar with the Sino-Soviet split?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my family is from the Soviet Union, right? And so in my house, we were always pretty anti-China back in the day, mm-hmm. right? We were Soviet people. We just were. And one of the big criticisms that comes from the American Communist Party, the Soviets, was that this period of Chinese history took on what we call an ultra-left character, right? Lenin wrote a book back in the day, and you'll like this title, called Left-Wing Communism, an Infantile Disorder.
Really?
Yep. It's either disorder, disease, or sickness. The translations are all different. But what he's talking about is the left of communists and how silly and childish they are, basically, right? And the notion that the proletarian cultural revolution that the Chinese are engaging in can change culture from the level of human action is an anti-Marxist notion, right? For Marxism, culture and everything within society is based on our level of development, which is based on our technology, which is based on our actions as human beings, but also technology itself and the laws of development, right? The continual like capitalist competition creating better products, right? That kind of thing. And so, not to say that the Cultural Revolution didn't have genuine reasons it happened. It did, but that most Marxists consider it an error and a horrible tragedy. The Chinese Communist Party themselves consider it a horrible tragedy, right
Wait,
now.
so that's news to me.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I want to give you a lot of credit. I didn't know your position here. So if I'm getting it accurately, you're saying James Lindsay is pointing out a cultural, not economic, because a lot of Marxism was just straight up economics, right?
Well,
Or
the way I describe it is Marxism is a worldview and methodology of thought that allows a materialist view of political economy. And I say political economy because I think it's impossible to separate the two.
okay. But so what you're saying is James Lindsay is picking out a certain error, and not an error. I was going to say era, E-R-A, but it
Right.
kind of sounds like error
Kind of
of that you don't support that cultural stuff from Mao. Is that correct?
right. It was
so-
most communists at the time were calling this ultra leftism.
Mhm.
And like I said, I'm not saying it didn't have to happen. I don't judge people. I don't
Mhm.
really take a side on history. I don't say I support X. I condemn Y. It's just history, right?
History's
We learn from
complicated.
it,
Yeah,
and we
life is
move on.
complicated. Yeah.
Exactly.
But here's
And
one
so-
thing when I'm just real quick, when I look at having conversations with people, this is consistency here. A lot of times you have conversation with people who are not real people. They're inconsistent for whatever reason. So I just want to highlight for those who question Noah, or he's saying that he's not for the cultural stuff now. And when you saw it in the past, historically, when was this, 1950 or something like that, when the Sino...
I'd have to look. I believe
Okay.
it was in the late 50s and 60s. But one of the really messed up things about it, and we're short on time, so I just want to get this part out, is the Red Guards, right? And this is a very ultra thing. It was mostly a peasant movement. It wasn't really led in a central way by the party. Most of them were children.
Yeah.
Were teenagers and lower. And there were people literally murdering their teachers and calling them, bourgeois reactionaries. That's crazy. That is crazy. And we should never, I don't think any Americans would ever stand for something like that. But I also want to sort of point a light at, put the focus on the fact that this is sort of the idea to do this actually came up in the early Soviet Union, and Lenin rejected it, right? They were calling it pro-cult there, or proletarian culture, this notion that they needed to enforce a type of culture. And Lenin was like, why would we do that? We should take all of the treasures of mankind, meaning we should learn from all of history, right? And embrace it and our place within it. We are a particular place within it, but don't, hate the past for being the past.
Yeah. So let's end on this. Because I wanted to, we talked about this last time, Stalin, and there's, obviously, you can always talk about Lenin and Stalin, but let's talk about Stalin, that there was famine and death and destruction of opposition. Anybody who opposed Stalin, basically very similar to Lenin in a way. And you said that there are some good things, though, out of Stalin. I wonder if you're going to go with education. I think education got better, and there was some better economics, I believe. What were the good things that from Stalin that you would take for America that would fit with America?
Let me sort of put paint a picture first. Our politicians, what are they known for?
Lying, stealing, corruption, being self-aspirational sleazebags, among others.
Right, exactly. And they're people, just like the Soviet people were, right? And so this, we have to make sure we can verify what's being said. Now, the guy who immediately followed Stalin was this guy, Nikita Khrushchev, right? And he was a political opponent of Stalin's from way back. right? And he's like one of those very sleazy politico types, right? The sort of person who's a whip in our legislature that runs around saying, all right, I'll do this deal for that vote, that deal for this vote. And what the Soviets were genuinely trying to do within their system of councils was get rid of that. That was called factioning. And they tried to make that illegal, actually, right? Kind of failed, but that's what they did. They wanted people always voting the people they represented, right? If your oblast, which was kind of like a province or state, was saying, we want this, you're voting that. Or if it's a political decision, something else, you're voting your mind. You're not trading, right? But Khrushchev was definitely a vote trader, sleazy guy, etc., right? This notion that Stalin killed everyone who disagreed with him only comes up in, I believe it was 1956, when he comes into office and gives what he calls the secret speech, right? Which was a supposedly secret, yet leaked to Western media immediately, speech to the Politburo, or their main party or head body, right? And in it is when you hear Stalin, did everything wrong under the sun. He killed everyone who disagreed with him, etc. In fact, one of Stalin's main political failures was the further democratization of the Soviet Union after 1936. In 1936, what happens is they have a new constitution written basically by referendum. And they call this the Stalin Constitution, right? And this expands political and democratic rights like there had never been in any of the Soviet Union before, right? And what Stalin wanted to do is one of his big things was he wanted contested elections. And guess who? And we can look up the Soviet archives on this. They're all on record for votes, memos, etc. Khrushchev organized the bloc against them. And then he's living in this giant shadow of Stalin, who's basically known for two things: industrializing the country and being able to stand up to the US, which is a big deal for the Soviet people, and the hero that defeated Hitler. Now, that title, the hero that defeated Hitler, is one of the greatest titles you can ever have in history. And people loved him. He could do no wrong. In the eyes of my grandparents, Stalin was a saint. Mm-hmm. My grandmother would, when she was praying, she would pray for Stalin's safety while he was still alive. Like, my grandparents loved Stalin. One of the big things that got their support and won especially my grandfather's respect was anti-Semitism laws, right? It was the Stalin administration that made anti-Semitism illegal. And so we have to look into every claim and see what the actual facts are before we can go over the positives and negatives, because there are negatives. Don't get me wrong. There are. Stalin wasn't perfect. He wasn't the saint my grandma thought he was, but he was a pretty good leader, and he was still the guy that defeated Hitler. And he was known, and you can read like our politicians' journals on him and stuff. He was known for being that friendly guy that wanted to make a deal with you. And that just doesn't sound like the dictator we're told he is, right? And
you know who that sounds? It kind of sounds like Trump. They're calling Trump a dictator. He's not a dictator. It's not even possible in our system. He's the one getting arrested. So I don't know how much the comparison is. I'm not as an expert in Stalin as you, but that's the way you're describing it. A lot of people pray for Trump, but he's got a lot of faults too. It's kind of funny.
It's what he was, and like Trump is by his people, Stalin was that sort of man of the people. Now, I would say Trump really wasn't as authentic as he comes off, especially coming out of showbiz, but especially the way the media lies about him. It's a direct comparison.
Wow.
I mean, Trump was basically the devil for the media. And our media did the same thing to Stalin. Right after, I think, the war, Time magazine named Stalin Man of the Year. A year later, they were calling him a totalitarian dictator. So which is it, right? That Time article had an explanation of Soviet democracy in it, saying, like, here are our red friends. And then it was all the same because our forming oligarchy, which was just forming in those days, had a new target after the war. That was basically it.
It's so crazy because you go 50 years into the future now. It's possible that in textbooks, Donald Trump is described as a dictator, authoritarian, somebody who made race relations worse. All the stuff that you're living, you know, are lies now. Who knows who controls the history? So I'm open-minded to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking for some history, my favorite one is by Domenico Lucerdo, and it's called Stalin, The History and Critique of a Black Legend. A very fair analysis to him.
Dope. We'll leave it on that. Another great discussion. Noah, I appreciate you.
Me too, brother. This was fantastic. I can't wait for the next one. Honestly.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Everybody in the chat, thank you so much. Everybody in the chat, so good. I mean, there's a lot of disagreement, but it's on peace. Love it.
Disagreement's fine. Mm-hmm. Disagreement's like the way to build a bridge, in my opinion. Yep. You know, as long as you're not like, you know, being one of those internet trolls, like not listening and just telling somebody else what they think, you can do whatever. The sky's the limit as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, thank you so much. Yep. Can't wait for the next one, brother. I'm gonna head us out with that international again, if that's good with you. Stick
Absolutely.
around after. I'll send you a couple things.
Cool.
All right. See you later, everybody.
Peace.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.